Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to challenge a core human assumption by exploring the shocking reality that highly advanced chemistry, metallurgy, and data architecture have actually been completely erased from human history. You know, we often think of history as this steady, unstoppable march of progress, but the truth is far more complicated and, honestly, a lot more fragile.
So let's dive right into this by asking, does technology always move forward? I mean, is human progress truly a strictly linear, cumulative process, or are we far more vulnerable to losing our absolute greatest breakthroughs than we even realize? We tend to assume that every generation just naturally builds upon the preserved innovations of the last, but when you look at the historical and archaeological records, they reveal that our development is highly nonlinear.
And this brings us to the academic concept anchoring our explainer today, socio-technical decay. It's a fascinating idea that proves knowledge can so easily be buried when technical transmission chains break down. For instance, did you know that the complete destruction of Carthage in 1460 BCE resulted in the permanent loss of their incredibly advanced longboat engineering? Or that right now, in modern corporate environments, brilliant ideas are lost literally every day simply because engineers are legally bound to leave behind company-owned notebooks that just end up in the trash. Knowledge is surprisingly delicate. Section 1. Ancient Fire and Steel. Let's demystify some of the marvels of antiquity.
Okay, let's look at the sheer mechanics behind Byzantine Greek fire. This was a thermal pneumatic naval weapon first deployed in the 7th century that successfully repelled Arab sieges and protected Constantinople for hundreds of years. But it wasn't just some magic potion, it was a brilliantly complex delivery system. Because the liquid was incredibly thick with pine resins, it actually had to be preheated just to flow. Then, heavy double-acting force pumps pressurized it, shooting it out through a bronze siphon. But the Byzantine Empire kept the trigger mechanism so deeply centralized as a state secret that when the empire eventually fragmented, the whole thing just vanished.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is the actual science behind its supposedly magical ability to burn right on top of seawater. The Byzantine engineers mixed quicklime into an anhydrous petroleum naphtha base. When that pressurized stream of liquid hit the ocean water, the quicklime underwent a violently rapid hydration reaction. It generated localized heat spikes of over 300 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to vaporize and spontaneously ignite the petroleum on contact. It was chemically brilliant, absolutely terrifying, and completely lost to time. Moving on to our second ancient marvel, Damascus steel. The crucial point we have to understand here is the stark contrast between the lost nanostructured matrix of original Middle Eastern blades and the layered composites that modern blacksmiths make today. You see, modern Damascus is made artificially by mechanically folding and welding different steels together. But the original, legendary blades, the ones that could supposedly shear right through solid rock, were forged from a single crucible steel called woots, imported from India. Modern materials science has actually revealed that those original blades contain protective carbon nanotubes and nanowires. No way, right? Which reveals exactly why the technology vanished entirely by the 18th century. The great irony here is that those original bladesmiths didn't even know they were practicing nanotechnology. They were just relying on natural trace impurities like vanadium that were only present in specific Indian iron ores. So when those single-source mineral deposits were finally exhausted, the magic just stopped working. Combine that with an insanely specific low-temperature forging window and a fragile oral tradition of apprenticeship that decayed over generations, and well, the true enemy of progress here was just resource exhaustion and a broken chain of communication.
Section 2. The Flexible Glass Conspiracy. Let's look at how an emperor's sphere erased a massive materials breakthrough.
There's this incredible legend, recorded by historians like Pliny the Elder, that says a Roman craftsman brought Emperor Tiberius a drinking bowl made of flexible glass. When it was thrown hard onto the floor, it didn't shatter, it just dented, and the craftsman casually fixed it with a small hammer. Well, the most plausible scientific explanation for this is called the borosilicate hypothesis. Unlike the highly brittle Roman soda-lime glass of that era, if the artisan had accidentally integrated natural borax into his melt, he would have effectively created shatterproof borosilicate glass. It's the exact same material we rely on heavily for modern chemistry and oven cookware today. But this highlights the absolute absurdity of the story. Emperor Tiberius didn't look at this and see a magnificent technological leap forward. No, he saw a personal financial threat. Fearing that an unbreakable, malleable glass would devalue the empire's reserves of gold and silver, the state literally executed the sole inventor. By destroying his workshop over petty economic paranoia, they buried kilns capable of 1600 degrees Celsius temperatures, erasing the secret of flexible glass for nearly 2,000 years.
Section 3.
Modern miracles lost to time, paranoia and sudden death in the 20th century.
Now, you might be thinking technological loss is just some ancient problem. It's not. It is a continuous human vulnerability extending right up to our modern digital era. Notice how these losses just aren't stopping. In fact, we've lost two massive, paradigm-shifting inventions just within the last 25 years alone.
10,000. That staggering number is the temperature in degrees Celsius, which is roughly equivalent to a nuclear flash or the surface of the sun that a special plastic material called starlight could withstand. And the wildest part of the story? It was invented in the 1980s by a British hairdresser named Maurice Ward. On the BBC science program Tomorrow's World, they literally coated a raw egg in starlight and blasted it with a blowtorch. Minutes later, the egg was barely warm to the touch and still totally raw inside.
Let's actually break down the chemistry of starlight. It functioned as a highly advanced intumescent barrier. Under extreme heat, mundane things like the flour and sugar within it would carbonize, and baking soda would release carbon dioxide. This created a rapidly expanding, low-density carbon foam that totally insulated the object underneath. Plus, it didn't release toxic smoke. Aerospace and defense organizations like NASA and Boeing were desperate to buy it. But Ward was incredibly paranoid about anyone reverse engineering his work. He completely refused to patent it and demanded he keep 51% control of any venture. Unsurprisingly, no one would agree to those terms, and tragically, Ward took the exact formulation ratios to his grave in 2011.
Which brings us to our final modern anomaly, and a question that completely baffled global telecommunications investors back in the late 90s. Think about the massive data server farms and fiber optic cables we need just to stream high-definition movies today. Now ask yourself, how much space did it supposedly take back in 1999?
8. Just 8 kilobytes. It's almost unbelievable. But Dutch electronics engineer Ramke Jan Bernhard Sloot actually proved in live demonstrations to venture capitalists that he could store and play an entire feature-length movie using just 8 kilobytes of data.
So the real key to understanding this is that Sloot bypassed physical bandwidth constraints completely. He wasn't using standard pixel compression, he used a massive conceptual shift. His 8-kilobyte file didn't actually hold any of the movie's media data. Instead, it was a tiny data key that sequentially pointed to pre-rendered geometric and behavioral algorithms already stored within the host hardware's localized compiler. It dynamically assembled the movie in real time. It was this massive structural reference architecture that promised to revolutionize the tech world overnight.
But tragically, in July 1999, just days before he was scheduled to sign an expansive investment and distribution contract, Sloot died of a sudden heart attack. And because he maintained extreme operational security, his key software elements were stored on one single master floppy disk. In the chaos following his death, that disk simply disappeared. It is a bitter, bitter irony that a paradigm-shifting data architecture that could have changed the world was permanently lost because of one misplaced floppy disk. It essentially forced humanity to spend decades building the massive, energy-hungry physical network infrastructure that we rely on today.
Section 4. Why technology disappears. The systemic enemies of human progress.
As we've seen across all these different case studies, the true vectors of socio-technical decay are rarely dramatic foreign invasions. Instead, it's heavily guarded secrets, extreme centralization, greedy monopolies protecting their wealth, the exhaustion of natural resources, and simple inventor paranoia. And honestly, our current reliance on decaying digital storage, which archivists often refer to as the vulnerability of dust, rust, and must, means our modern knowledge is arguably more fragile right now than ancient stone petroglyphs. Which perfectly synthesizes the core lesson of our explainer today. Forgotten inventions highlight the incredibly fragile nature of progress and the absolute importance of preserving innovation. Knowledge has to be decentralized, meticulously documented, and actively shared if it's ever going to survive the test of time. When we lock ideas away in a single mind, a single floppy disk, or behind state walls, we risk setting human progress back by centuries. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Think about the highly fragile, proprietary, and closely guarded technological platforms we blindly rely on right now. From massive corporate algorithms to unpatented material composites. What modern miracle are we on the verge of losing today simply because we aren't protecting the chain of transmission? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.